Two. Hello, Garland Nixon here. We're hanging out with the one and only Peter Erickson from Conversations Amongst the Ruins. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and today we're hanging out with Peter Erickson. Peter and his son Charlie have a fantastic channel. I'm sure you're familiar with it, called Conversations Amongst the Ruins. I'm proud to have found it early. When I first watched it, it had 11,000 subscribers. So it seems, what's it, you guys up around 40 or 50 now, right?
Yeah, something like 45,000, I think.
Awesome, yeah. Awesome. That's good news. And but at any rate, enough good news. Now we get to US foreign policy. Let's get into it. Let's start with Europe. You know, there was a meeting in Copenhagen recently, and you know, these leaders have just gone bananas. You've got Tusk running around. Tusk, the former president or prime minister, whatever the heck of Poland, is running around saying, yes, the advantage. He literally said this: the advantage the Russians have is here in the heart and in the mind. They're willing to fight. They're ready to fight, but we're not willing to fight. In other words, you guys are a bunch of softies. And I thought to myself, perhaps they're motivated to fight as opposed to a bunch of people they support their leader. They believe in the mission. They believe they're defending themselves. And you got a bunch of people who feel like they're getting screwed by their leaders. Anyway, your thoughts on this Copenhagen meeting, all this anger, all this fury about these evil Russians flying drones and
yeah, no, it's quite extraordinary. Actually, I was just talking about that with Charlie earlier today. But first of all, this hysteria actually reminds me in a certain way of the Russiagate hysteria, several years ago. We forget about it, but that was pretty wild. I mean, it was just one thing after another. The Russians are here. The Russians are there. The Russians are coming. They did this. They did that. And, each one of these things, when you actually look closely, just kind of vanished. But they went on to the next one. And it lasted for like 3 years or so. And I see the Europeans doing the same thing. It's just like, the Russians have done this. They're behind this sabotage. It's, they're sending drones in, it's the shadow fleet is going to attack us at any moment. And it just seems to be getting, the hysteria is becoming more and more intense. And I don't know. I kind of I never really understood what was behind the Russian, anti-Russian hysteria. I know there are these people who have always been, seen Russia as a geopolitical adversary that had to be taken out, and it was in their interests. But it was so much of it. But I don't know how so many people actually were sucked into that hysteria. And I find myself wondering about the Europeans too, kind of worrying about them. It brings to mind actually a movie I remember seeing 20 years ago, 25 years ago, called The Beautiful Mind. About this mathematician, this genius that actually goes crazy. He has schizophrenia and just enters this world of fiction. He lived in this paranoid fantasy. And I remember one scene is where, you go into his room and you see that he's covered a wall with this diagram that kind of is supposed to explain the world. And you look at it and say, this man is totally insane. But I'm seeing the same thing from the Europeans. I remember actually back in the Trump years during the Russiagate hoax, I remember seeing these diagrams, like one from the HuffPost, and it was really all these different arrows and these boxes and circles and triangles. And at the very top, there was this square, and inside they wrote Putin.
You're right. Did you ever see the spider web things? There was a thing. It was this guy named, I think, Clint Russell and some others. So they had this fraudulent thing called the Hamilton 68 dashboard.
I remember
that. And it was supposedly they were online finding Russian, whatever, I don't know, disinformation. And they would tie, and it had George Galloway's name, Jimmy Dore. And there was all these spider web lines going. My name was on there at one point. I was upset at first, it wasn't. And it was pointing to all these different things. And then there was Russia and there was Putin. And you looked at it and you're like, Yeah, it kind of does look like a spider web. I will give them that. It looks like a spider web. But and eventually, what we found out was that the Hamilton dashboard, Matt Taibbi, and some other people uncovered that the whole thing was a fraud.
Yeah,
That it
of
was
course.
all along. It was a fraud, and they knew it was a fraud, but they played it like it was real.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I remember those diagrams. But I'm seeing the same things coming out of Europe now. Like just recently, there's a map from The Economist. And there are all these little circles and squares and different colors, and it's like here, this is an arson attack. Like apparently for some reason the Russians try to burn down an IKEA store in Finland or someplace like that, and here's a drone attack, and here's one thing. I was just looking at it, and it seemed like, what's going on? I thought The Economist was supposed to be a very cerebral and sober kind of magazine. But I thought the same thing about a lot of Americans that just went off the deep end during the Russiagate years. So yeah, they seem to be in the grips of the same, of a similar delusion for some reason. And I wonder why, Russia sets them off this way. I have, this. I don't know if it really explains it, but I think, that they sense or they know at some level that their reign is coming to an end, that Western hegemony is going to fall, that it is falling, and that it's just set off this deep-seated panic. And they point, the easiest, rather than really analyze where they've gone wrong, and we need to make adjustments, and we need to actually start meeting the needs of our people and so on. They find an end that's convenient to put it all on, and it's Russia. Yeah.
I get this feeling also that the Americans and the Brits, of course, but for different reasons, the Americans have always been trying to take Russia out. And with the Americans, it was strictly business. Look, we'll tell people that they're communists and we'll try to take them out. Well, they're not communists anymore. Okay, well, we'll just say they're mean or something, whatever, because here's the bottom line. They got natural resources and we want them, and they don't want to give them up. So we got to take them out because we got to rule the world. That's America. We understand how the mentality, we disagree with it, we despise it, and it's bad for the working class, but it is what it is. So they grab the Europeans along with the Brits and I think Americans, and they say, okay, we got this thing going, we got this Ukraine thing going, we got this our sanctions, and it didn't work. And I think, like for instance, the Trump administration, they look at it practically. Well, maybe we can put this thing on hold. We don't want to put any money on this. We'll go take out China or Venezuela or somebody while we're doing that. That ain't working. Let's do something else for a while. Mm-hmm. And I think they underestimated how crazy and anti-Russian the Europeans were. I think to some extent, the Americans thought, okay, well, now that we want to put this on hold, we'll just call hey, French, Germans, you guys, yeah, we'll put this on hold for a while. We're going to go over here and kill some other innocent people in another part of the world. And instead, the Europeans like, oh my God, we hate them. And they're like, no, we were like making that stuff up, remember? So we could kill them, but now we got to go over here. Remember, that was supposed to be a fraud. And to particularly the Brits, this is what I think. We are the British. We are genetically, intellectually, and philosophically superior to the Russians. And darn, they don't know their place. Why, when we tell them to take their place at the foot of our table, they must take their place at the foot of our table. How dare they not? Don't they know who we are? Not amused, right? And the Americans are like, enough with all that stuff. We're just trying to run the world. That ain't working. We're going to do something else. We're more practical. And the Brits are like, no. They must be put in their place. For we are the mighty, Anglo-Saxon, it is a thing where they feel superior. And they can't believe that these filthy little Slavs refuse to know their place. And the Russians are like, dude, we got hypersonic missiles and you don't. Get off our backs. And you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, no, I do. I think there's quite a bit of truth to that. It's actually it's even more amusing when you think that you just go back like 15 years ago. Like I think it was the Munich conference in 2008. That's when they first, the Americans really pushed and finally got the Europeans to agree to the idea of bringing in both Georgia and Ukraine into NATO. But the Europeans, were trying to argue against it. People like Merkel. and say, hey, this is not a good idea. They were showing more sense back then on, in general. Probably the Brits were already crazy, but
Yeah.
I can't really remember. But then I've just recently been reading about 2014, and even then, it was the Brits that were a little bit more cautious, and it was the Americans were pushing them into it. Remember that famous phone call with Victoria Nuland?
Yeah.
It's like F the EU, right? But now, it's just what you have. I think it's partly is that like the Americans were too successful in actually bending the arms of the Europeans, convincing them to go along with this. And now they become total converts, and they have the zeal of converts. And then I think another thing is too that they have. I think it was the political scientist Richard Sakwa called it the Ukrainization of the EU. Meaning that, you have these fanatics in Ukraine, the ultra nationalists who are just, they're anti-Russian and with every fiber of their being. That's what they live for, is to kill Russians and to denounce them and demonize them. And, you embrace them, and it's actually sort of come home to Europeans, and you also have, a fair number of fanatics in places like the Baltic states and so on. And when they brought these in, they was think, the idea is we're going to control them, but I think thanks to the Americans on the one side and these new members on the other side, they have become like the most zealous of the Russophobes. And now, they can't let go of it. It's just like that same part of their mind that they once had. And like you're saying, it's combined with this sense of supremacy that was always there. We are the superior people. We are the West. We are civilization. We are the garden and they are the jungle. To quote the former, was the High Representative of Foreign Affairs for the EU. And that's all those things come together for just the end result is this complete inability to actually see the Russians as real people that they need to deal with. And they've made them into monsters, and so they're constantly shrieking and leaping up on the chair and clutching their pearls and whatever you do when you see a monster.
A while back also, Boris Johnson said something to the effect of, well, if the Russians win, then hegemony is over, right? Yeah. Donald Tusk, if we lose this, it's over. I think also, now, first of all, they're a little late. They've already lost hegemony. They're trying to, it's kind of like the book Simulacra and Simulacrum, where, a person tries to recreate something from the past that didn't exist. So you're trying to recreate something you think was in the past, but it never really existed. Mm-hmm. So you're not recreating something, but you think you are, right? It's kind of that dynamic where they're saying, we've got to hold on. We've got to hold on to power. And you're like, Russia's got a much more powerful military than NATO right now. And they have the ability to really hurt you. And you have like no soldiers. Oh, by the way, you're broke and you have no real industry or military industrial complex. Oh, by the way, China's rich and you're broke and they're supplying everybody with stuff. So how can you be hegemonic when you're militarily weak, you're economically weak? Oh, and did I mention your people hate your guts? 13% approval rate, 15% approval rate. So they're trying to hold on to hegemony. They're afraid if we lose this, we lose hegemony, which is absurd. Because in your mind, you still have hegemony. In practical reality, if you're broke, your economy is actually in ruins, your military industrial complex is in ruins, and your actual politically, you're falling apart. The people are ready to go grab the the pitchforks at any, you're trying to hold on to this. The only people that think they still have hegemony is themselves.
Yeah, no, it's true. Just going back to that statement by Donald Tusk, where he said it's just like the one thing that they have over us, is that they have the will, in their minds, their hearts to. Well, there's some truth to that, okay, but that's not the one thing, as you're pointing out. It's everything, and this is actually part of their delusion. They kind of assume that no matter what, of course we're superior. Of course, our technology is superior. Of course, our economy is superior, and so on and so forth. All those things. Of course, we're superior. Why aren't we beating the Russians? Well, it just must be a matter of will, and that's the idea. It's like we just need to come together and and exert our will. We just need to maybe throw off the restraints and take our gloves off or whatever. But that's nonsense. In the end, you take your gloves off and everything, but there's nothing for you to grab. Yeah, no, it's just that sense of superiority. I think really blinds them to reality. You're just so sure that you're superior. You just don't stop and, take stock of things and say, wait a second, this doesn't look good. This isn't, maybe we need to make a deal.
There's another issue that, since we're on this subject overall, that I think has to be, I want to get your thoughts on it. I think we should address it. Historically, a country goes, for instance, Russia's going to war. You're right. Why are they successful? Two things. Number one, they provided for their people. I was reading somewhere that like the first 8 years of President Putin's being in power, the average salary for Russians tripled, which, they were in pretty bad shape when he took over.
Yeah.
And it has increasingly grown. So the bottom line is this: for the masses, they've provided. People can look around and say, we've got more than we did before. Things are cleaner. We're stronger. Our economy's stronger. We've got jobs. We came out of the 1990s of complete disaster to a respectable country that's getting wealthier. You're providing for the average schmuck on the ground. The people believe in what you're doing. Hey, we're being threatened. Remember the Great Patriotic War? Look at those people. They're goose stepping around with Hitler tattoos all over them. So the people in Russia are like, hey, I'm on board. We better do something about that, right? You were able to build a case for the people that says we got to fight. So the people behind it. I get the feeling right now, if the U.S. says, okay, we got to fight Iran for Israel, we're going to have a draft. Based on the numbers I see, the people from 1849, from 18 to 39 would burn this friggin' country to the ground.
Yeah.
I watch videos of people in the UK screaming and yelling, I got to get out of here. I'm leaving. This place is a cesspool. It's a sewer. It's falling apart. They were showing potholes in the road that go all the way back to these cobblestone streets from the 1600s, right? I mean, literally, they're like, see this? These are cobblestone streets that were made in 1600s. Look at the potholes. They're all the way down to the 1600s. We're going backwards, right? The people in France are in the streets already. And they're in the streets over the Gaza and the flotilla. So you've got leaders saying we might have to soon go to war with Russia, even though we don't really have anything guns to actually give you when you get there, but we'll send you there or something. Maybe you can scream at them. Human waves, I guess that's the only option. But my point being, they're saying they want to go to war with Russia.
Yeah.
The U.S. is saying, yeah, this and that. If the U.S. tried to draft people to go to war with Iran, if these Mertz and these people said, we're going to start drafting and you send you to the Ukrainian border, I think that'd be into those countries. The people wouldn't do it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And that's actually the thing that gives me hope is that, just recently Trump claimed that Russia was a paper tiger, but the real paper tiger or the paper chihuahuas are the Europeans. And so, yeah, they can talk big and whatever, but when push comes to shove, they're going to find out they're going to come up empty. They may want to do it, but it's like when they give the order, even their own generals will say, no, I think really that may very well happen. Just, hey, we can't do this. I'm sorry. And then that'll be the end of it.
Send a division to the Russian border. We don't have a division. Okay, then a brigade. How about a platoon? What if they literally have to call the Russians like the Germans? They sent this tank brigade to the infamous Sawicki Gap in case the Russians come through, except they didn't have tanks. And they're like, okay, we're sending the tank brigade in case the Russians come through, but we probably won't have tanks till 2027, hopefully. What are you going to do? Yes, Russians, we're ready to fight you. Okay, but we need you to give us a couple years before we get, ammunition and, the proper tanks to fight you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, it's true. I mean, they depleted the stockpiles. I mean, these militaries didn't amount to much, even before the SMO was launched. But, since then, they've been really just stripped of everything they've had, and, including air defense. And we can see that air defense is a really big part of conflict now. any sort of real war that could break out between NATO and Russia, they're going to be missiles flying. Now, Russia has the air defense. It probably has the best air defense in the world. And, as we could see in Poland, remember what we had those 19 decoy drones, with the duct tape on them and whatever. They flew well into Poland. I hear different stories, either 3 or 4 that got shot down. But they scrambled all these jets, different NATO countries, and they ended up bringing down maybe 3, maybe 4 of these decoy drones, and they also took out a house in the process.
Oh, don't forget the chicken coop.
Oh yeah, right.
That was the famous one. Let me show you a picture. Excuse me. Let me show you. This is my favorite one. Poland shared with us a chicken coop, a drone that landed on a chicken coop, and it was a magical drone. This is literally it. Now, somehow it flew through the woods. Or maybe perhaps it landed vertically or it backed up, but I don't know how it came forward and landed on top of that chicken coop.
Yeah.
I put it like this. The drones got the Russians got some hella technology. They got some awesome technology.
Right.
This little thing that looks like something I could buy at Costco for, my child at, during Christmas. Somehow flew like 1,000 miles from Russia into Poland and then reverse landed. I guess it has reverse thrusters on a chicken coop. And here's what's interesting: did absolutely no damage to the roof of the chicken coop. So there we go. That's what they.
Well, I mean, looking at that, obviously the Russians have some sort of extraordinary technology. I don't think we could pull that off. There's something.
But it gets into the preposterous nature of all of this. But the whole, it's become, a caricature of an international clash, right? You know what I mean? It's a farcical international clash. On one side, you got the Russians saying, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and physically they're capable of doing it. Mm-hmm. On the other side, you got people saying, we'll stand up and fight you, when they don't have the things to stand up and fight you. They don't have the people, they don't have the money. We're ready to go. We've got to stand, we've got to be prepared. The other day, one of the French leaders said, we must be prepared immediately for war with Russia, tonight if necessary. But meanwhile, they've got to prepare tonight, but they've given, I saw something that said they've given all of their long-range howitzers, almost all of those were gone to Ukraine. They've given everything up to Ukraine. They have nothing, but yet they'll say, we must be prepared for intense warfare tonight with Russia. I guess Russia's supposed to be coming to France to fight them.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I think, and around the same time that general came out and said that, we must be ready to fight tonight, the French actually did detain one of those so-called shadow tankers, that was carrying Russian oil to India. And the government didn't say so much, but the press said they're looking for those drones. And, they're sure that there was something fishy going on in that tanker. And Macron, suggested that we might just hold on to this tanker for a long time, and it'll be part of this will disrupt, seriously interfere with Russia's oil exports. Well, I heard that. I think it was sometime earlier today they let the tanker go. I guess they didn't find any drones, and maybe they decided it wasn't such a good idea to hang on to it. Maybe they weren't really ready for war tonight.
What? Because the thing is this: everything's a bluff.
Yeah.
That's why they constantly, there's projection. That's why they constantly say Putin's bluffing. Putin's bluffing. How do you know that? Because we're bluffing, so he must be. So let's go next to Venezuela. So a place, as I'm familiar with. I've traveled to Venezuela. I met with the opposition. I know that I met with the opposition in Venezuela. Met with government officials. When I was there, I met Rafael Correa. I didn't meet him, but some of the other people I was with met the guy that was in charge of Bolivia. I can't think of his name. That they in 2019 they tried to overthrow the government.
Okay, I forget the name.
Yeah, what I'm talking about. It was great. Met lots of people and traveled around and really learned in depth about Venezuela. But so the bottom line is this: apparently the Trump administration is saying they blew up another quote drug boat. And I have questions about that, because the first time it was blown, they allegedly blew up a drug boat. When they asked the Venezuelans, they said that was an AI video. Anybody can look that up. That's what they said. They said it was an AI video. We've never had the Venezuelan government or anybody say, here are the names of the people that they blew up. No family members, no nothing. There's been nothing to, except we blew up a boat and there was 9 people on it, but nothing ever came of that. It's very shallow and hollow. Like they're just NPCs, you know what I mean? That they're blowing up, right? But in Venezuela, they're just like, oh, this is terrible or whatever, but they don't really act as though they're killing anybody. So I have questions about whether they're doing it anyway. But your thought of this whole Venezuela foolishness?
Yeah, well, I find the whole thing just very embarrassing as an American, to be honest. I mean, it just seems a clear case of bullying. You know, just finding a relatively poor country in our hemisphere. You know, we've had trouble. We try to push around the Russians. We try to push around the Chinese and the Indians. It hasn't worked. You know, let's find a small country that we consider to be weak, and let's show how tough we are. The whole thing is just so absurd. You know, the claim that it's run by a cartel, and that this is, if your concern is drugs, you would not be attacking Venezuela. I think, you know, anybody who's looked at this knows that it's like 1% of the drugs, you know, have come through or passed through Venezuela. You would be focusing on Colombia and other
Peru.
countries.
A lot of cocaine comes out of Peru, Colombia.
Right. So, So
and let me add this. You know, one of the things shows like the age of these people. They're still living in Miami Vice with cigarette boats. That's not how these guys. That's like a movie from the 1980s. How do they do it? They take a speedboat and they load bales of marijuana on the speedboat or cocaine, and then they take this speedboat and they go flying into the U.S. and they're 1,300 miles or something crazy, 1,000 miles away. Right. I'm supposed to believe that they got on a speedboat,
right,
and went 1,000 miles.
Yeah,
when they've got like all of these, now the drug cartels are very, very wealthy. They have like billions. They literally have huge drones, and they just take the drone and they just connect whatever to it. They'll fly hundreds of pounds and they fly it over the border, X amount of miles into the U.S. And then they load, and then they drop it off somewhere and come back and get another load. They have submarines. Have you ever seen it?
Yeah, no, I've heard about that. Yeah,
they got subs.
Right.
They got drones. And I'm supposed to believe that they packed a speedboat, which probably has a cruising range of 150 miles, somehow suddenly has a cruising range of 1,000 miles. And when they charted their route, they said, where are we going to go? Well, I don't know. There's a flotilla of American ships right off the coast. Why don't we go right through them? Perfect idea. I'm supposed to believe they're that stupid.
Yeah, no, the whole thing is just absurd, just on the face of it. It's just incredible. And it's one thing I'm amazed at is that the extent to which everyone, or, you know, not everyone, but so many people are going along with this obvious fiction. You know, back in 1989, we did invade Panama to seize Manuel Noriega. I remember that quite well. And Noriega, right? But at the time, you know, again, he in fact was deeply involved in the drug trade. I think that's true. But there was in fact a very high-ranking general that resigned at the time. You know, it was under the Bush Senior, because he said, this is not right. This is not what we use the U.S. military for. This is a question. This is a criminal enterprise. You know, this should be addressed, you know, through legal means and other avenues. And he resigned. And now this is actually what's happening now is so far beyond so much, you know. If there wasn't a proper legal basis for that invasion, you know, what can you say about this whole Venezuela escapade? I mean, it makes actually the Noriega venture actually look very, very sensible and restrained by comparison.
Well, they're very similar for this reason. They told us they were going after Noriega for drugs, when in fact they went after Noriega because he wasn't cooperating. He was failing to cooperate with the Nicaraguan. In Nicaragua, we were working with the Contras, and might I ask, we were running drugs with the CIA was running drugs. I mean, there's been books written about it, a movie, Air America. So at the time, we said we're arresting him for drugs, and we were the ones who were running drugs into the inner cities and then arresting a bunch of kids in the inner cities for being drug dealers and being crackheads after we caused the crack. I mean the United States. And what's interesting is if you look into Noriega, the entire like Miami skyline was built with cocaine money, and in the 1980s. So I would get into it, but when in my former law enforcement career, I was working for the governor's office, and I would go around the country doing various things, helping police departments with their promotional systems, helping them, okay. And one of the places was Miami, so I would work with the Miami police, and I got to talk with guys. This was around 2002, 3, 1 in that range. Okay, early 2000s. And so I got to talk with some old timers that were back there in the 80s, and they told me a couple of things. One of the things they said was that they were like, man, when I first started, when you come here, he says, all you saw, all officers just got out of the academy. He says, all you saw was Porsches, Ferraris, Mercedes. All of the officers were driving supercharged because they were all on the take.
Yeah.
Everybody was. The sergeant was on the take. Everybody in the police department was on the take, right? They also said that these people that like every Mercedes-Benz dealer or whatever, right, got people walked in and everybody had a check that said the Bank of Panama. Everything that was bought, gold, everything in the city that was bought with all this drug money, it was a check. And that check was the Bank of Panama. He said, now everybody knew it. He said, but those guys were selling Mercedes-Benz. They ain't asking no questions. Nobody was asking any questions. You get the Bank of Panama. How much does that check for? 150,000. Thank you very kindly. Here's your car, right? But he said that was the way it was in the city. It was everybody knew, and they knew all about Panama. And the guys would say, yeah, well, what happens is you fly the stuff in. The Panamanian military would meet them at the whatchamacallit. They would help them transport the stuff to other stuff. They would guard the drugs. They would help them fill out. They would have the paperwork. That's all paid for, filling out the manifest to say it was this or that, right? It was something other than drugs. And then off it went and it flew in. And that was all handled. And they would ask that people would say, well, what about because they the guys, they say, well, what about the U.S.? And they said, that's all done. Everybody's paid off. When you get there, nobody's going to ask you any questions. So everything, the corruption was in Panama. The corruption was here. The corruption was in the police department. It was full corruption. And we were running drugs, which just tells you right now, the corruption is also in the U.S. government. People are paid off. So bottom line is this whole thing is a fraud.
Yeah. Well, I remember actually back at that time, I think maybe my geopolitical understanding was certainly limited, but I remember feeling very uncomfortable about it. And it just seemed to me that it was such an easy target. It's not us Americans, just as you're saying, you pointed it out in much more detail than I didn't grasp those details at that time. But I knew that, for example, the demand was in the US, you have the demand, that's what brings the drugs in. But it was those dastardly foreigners, they was so easy to externalize the threat and choose somebody outside of the U.S., make him the focus of, or the locus of all evil and take him out. And that seems to be the American way, unfortunately. And we see it again with Trump in, particularly blatant and crude form right now in the case of Venezuela.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting? I remember when Trump said, hey, he said, W. Bush lied us into a war in Iraq. And the system went, oh, that's terrible. You can't say that he's done. And then most Americans were like, yeah, we know he's telling the truth. Get out of here. And that kind of helped him in 2016.
Yeah.
But he's turned into George W. Bush. He's lying about his reason for wanting to attack Iran. What weapons of mass destruction. He's lying about basically, what is he doing? Lying us into war. So it really, in a way, it wasn't George W. Bush, as Paul Wolfowitz said. And what Wolfowitz or one of those two guys, him or the other, the clown that he was friends
Yeah,
with.
Faith, I think Douglas Faith. But
I can't think of the other guy's name. You had two. Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl
oh,
said,
okay, all
he
right.
said, we settled upon weapons of mass destruction because we thought that was something that everybody could agree on.
Yeah.
Right. So Trump's like, well, I guess we settle among drugs. What do you think? Drugs? I don't know. How about you? Weapons of mass destruction? Nah, we're using that in Iran. Okay. Drugs. Okay, let's do it. Drugs. That's it.
Yeah.
He's now Bush because it wasn't Bush. The system is George W. Bush.
Yeah, no, I think you're completely right. I think why they want to take him out. Well, part of it, I think there's this personal obsession of our Secretary of State Rubio, but then, hey, they've got supposed to have the most oil reserves in the world. I think that might have something to do with it. Yeah,
Who
you
owns the
look for a
refinery
convenience.
too? I
Yeah,
don't know about you. There's a refinery down in Texas, and this refinery specifically refines the salt, very heavy sulfur crude oil
right.
that Venezuela has. That's the issue with it. It has a lot of sulfur. But there's a refinery in Texas, one refinery in the United States that refines that, and it's owned by the Charles Koch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. No, they're obviously interested in oil, but they're not going to say we're going to go take the oil. Maybe Trump wanted to, but
Yeah,
because that's the sort of thing he might do. That's the, that's the side that I almost like about him. He's so brutally honest. He sometimes says the quiet part out loud, and that's actually good, so people see what's going on. But I'm sure they told me, no, we got to come up with another. We always have to come up with a cover story. And this is what'll work. And yeah, they kind of batted around a few things, and then it was the drugs and the cartels, and that's what they're going with. You're absolutely right.
And that's where we are. And here's the other part of it too. We always talk about wars, and the Biden administration was thrilled. Okay, boy, we got our war started with Ukraine. Now we can go ahead and sanction Russia. We can finish them off, and then we can go in there. Oh boy, we're going to get all of these goodies. How great, how wonderful is this, right? You can start wars, but you can't predict where they're going to go or how they're going to end, and you can't control it. Man, I'm telling you, they don't want to. In the past, I had heard it said, well, they'll never. I had read accurately, yes, the one place they won't invade is Venezuela because the people are all armed and they'll fight.
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, they're right. I mean, I can tell you that's not a good idea. Now they're talking about it, and I'm thinking Trump's a fool. If he goes into, what is he going to do? And it's not like Venezuela's without arms. You know what I mean? They got SU-30s, they got F-16s. They can put some anti-ship missiles, hang them up on those things. They're quite good friends with the Russians. I have read that they do have some Chinese anti-air defense systems. I would guarantee they have some anti-ship missiles. What happens? Yes, sir. We're going to fix them. We're going to do this. Is nice and easy. We'll do some bombing runs on Caracas. We'll fire some missiles. Well, what happens if a salvo of anti-ship missiles comes whistling across the sea at wave top line, and a couple of those ships get blown to hell and take 300 American sailors to the bottom? Which is a potential right now, as we've seen with our air defense systems. If they got decent missiles, we can't do anything with the Houthis, and the Houthis don't have F-16s and Su-30s.
Right.
There's a potential here. What does Trump do if he starts punching and the Venezuelans punch back and we get a bloody nose? And then what? We're going to declare war on Venezuela. You shot at them first.
Yeah. Well, it won't stop us.
They got two things in Venezuela. They got three. They got jungles, they got mountains, and they got mountains with jungles on them. Do you really want to go in there and fight?
Yeah. Right. No, that's the kind of terrain that really favors the defenders and and again, small arms, guerrilla bands, that kind of thing. Yeah, it would be a nightmare, I think, for any invading force. I don't know what weapons they actually have. I've heard all these rumors. I know the Russians have worked with them and provided some training, some kind of weapons. I don't know exactly the extent of it. But the thing is, we live in a completely different world right now, where the new technologies really often favor these poorer countries in a way that was not possible a couple decades ago, even a decade ago. So, of course, we all saw what happened with the Houthis and the Red Sea. We're talking about real poverty. This is, the poorest country in the Arab world. And yeah, we bombed them for a month after, Biden bombed them for a month and whatever. And then we,
The Saudis had
we
bombed
turned
them for
tail
like
and
the
went home.
Saudis had bombed them for like 8 years.
Yeah, right,
And they were
yeah,
kicking their butts. The
right.
Saudis had to run because they were firing drones and started to decimate the Saudis' oil infrastructure, and the Saudis had to tap out.
Yeah. So I don't know if the Venezuelans what they've have prepared, but again, a small drone, a small drone or a missile, that might cost thousands of dollars can seriously threaten a ship that costs tens of millions of dollars. That's the world that we live in. It used to be right. All the advantage was to the wealthier country, to the superpower like the U.S. But the new technology has really leveled the playing field. So yeah, there's a real risk that the whole thing just won't, it won't go according to script. I know what Trump's imagining. He wants to have a sort of, I think he probably wants a replay of like what he did in Iran. Just something quick in and out. And maybe he can pull it off, but maybe not.
Let me show you a picture from Venezuela. Orinoco Tribune is a Venezuelan paper. Look at this, right?
Yeah.
Venezuela honors women militia members. These are women. Let me tell you something. I personally was in small villages having women. There was a lot of women there, and there was one that could speak English, and she walked up and pointed. You tell the Americans, we will fight for it. She's pointing. I'm like, hey, I'm American, but I don't want any trouble, right? She was ready to, have a piece of me right there. They were pissed. These women, by the millions,
right?
Somewhere between 2 and 4 million people armed. The revolutionary government of Venezuela didn't say we better take the arms from our people because we're afraid we'll overthrow the government. No, they support the government. They actually armed their citizens and said, if them damn gringos show up, you shoot them right between the freaking eyes. And that's the plan. And this is not propaganda. I can tell you, I saw it with my own eyes. That ain't propaganda. And now, oh, well, look at those women. Who's scared of them? Once they start numbering in the millions, you got a problem. There's nowhere you can go in that country. There's nowhere you can walk, you can breathe, you can stand that you're not going to be shot at nonstop, ambushed constantly. There's no way to go in that country.
Yeah. No, it could be a disaster. I don't know what's going to happen, but I imagine that a U.S. attack is obviously, first of all, it's not going to be popular in Venezuela, but it's also not going to be popular anywhere else in Latin America. I guess Maduro's relations with most other governments in the region aren't very good. But if you want to make him popular, this is probably the best way to do it. Is to launch an unprovoked attack on his country. Attempt a decapitation strike, and we saw what happened in Iran. There was it's always a minority, but there was a minority that was dissatisfied with the government and actually just continued to look to the West. And but now it's like sign me up, give me a gun.
They're in Iran screaming. They're angry at the government, saying, "How come we don't have nukes left yet?" Literally. The people in the street, well, how come we don't have nukes? We got to get nukes as soon as possible. It's the nature. In the Arab world, they have a saying, and it goes like this: me against my brother, me and my brother against you, me against my brother, me and my brother against my cousin, me and my brother and my cousin against you. You know what I mean? And you see where they're going with that. But that's nature. When someone attacks your town, your village, your country, your planet, whatever the case may be, you tend to push back as a unit, as a group. And I think this is something else. And Trump's like, we're going to fight, Venezuela and Iran at the same time, which one of them may be a head fake so they can go after the other. But whatever the case may be, I don't think this stuff's going to be real popular amongst his base, based on the whole Charlie Kirk situation, based on what happened the last time with Iran. There are a lot of MAGA people saying, we voted for you because we didn't want to get caught up in foreign entanglements.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Again, it was what Trump pulled off against Iran actually was popular with his base, but that was a close call. He managed to, because it was followed by an end to the war, and they say, okay, that's it. We flew in there, we dropped our bombs, and we were just the most awesome military in the world, and now we can release our videos and whatever. I think that works, unfortunately, but there. Prior to that, all the polls were showing that, hey, nobody really wants to have a war with Iran. And it was actually because this particular mission kind of led to the end of the war with Iran that, okay, we said, all right, we'll clap and let's go back and deal with other things now. It's over, right? So yeah, it's not just a left-right thing. I think it's across the political spectrum. There just isn't the support for these kind of foreign entanglements. And if he gets us entangled, whether it's in Venezuela or Iran, it's going to be, you'll see his poll numbers plummet, much further than they already have.
And I think the term that you use is the term that was being used amongst the MAGA people, foreign entanglements. Because like you said, he threw a punch. And it was a fake punch. You know what I mean? He threw a fake punch. It was like in the movies where the guy swings and then the noise goes pow and the guy falls. And it looks like he was punched. And it certainly appears as though he was punched. And everything looks like he was punched. But in reality, it wasn't punched. They didn't punch. Come on. They called Iran. Hey, I'm going to drop some missiles. Okay, get rid of everything in that area. Sure. And Iran's like, hey, but I tell you what, I got to hit one of your bases. Right. Okay, which one? The one in Qatar. Fair enough. We'll drop some bombs in an open area and give you a week to be planned, and you do the same for Qatar, and we'll all call it even. People are like, he struck Iran. That ain't even striking Iran. It's like dropping them in the Mojave Desert for all intents and purposes. And then afterwards, we obliterated everything. Hey, come on, you made a deal with them, dude. Let's be honest. So I think people are okay with the illusion of an attack on Iran. An actual attack on Iran. Yeah. Wouldn't it? Because the other problem, we run into the Houthi problem. They can bloody your nose and bad. And what happens when bodies come home?
Yeah. No, there's no question about it. I mean, particularly, in the case of Iran, there are all kinds of juicy targets for the Iranians. So they could hit a lot, actually, with much easier targets than Israel. These are American bases just across the border in Iraq, and those bases in the Persian Gulf states. Those are those are within range of their short range missiles, which they didn't even use in this war. So yeah, and then any ships that get close are vulnerable too. They could do a terrific amount of damage. They've shown that they can do it. They demonstrated that against Israel, and that again, that was actually those were the harder targets to hit. So, yeah, well, so why? Again, I think that I don't know. I worry. I know that I think Trump has enough sense to try to keep out of it, but he's got Netanyahu, who's still there. Okay, that he is biding his time, looking for the opportunity to strike again and to bring the U.S. in. That's always been his plan. And this time Trump kind of was able to, use some kind of judo move on him and land that fake punching and step out of it real quick. But he might not be able to do it next time.
It's interesting because the U.S. is trapped by its imperial quest. It's trapped by being an empire, because it's like, all right, we're going to soup up this Ukraine military and we're going to sharpen them up and we'll throw them at Russia, right? Meanwhile, we'll throw all this stuff at in the hands of Israel, and Israel will just blast everything and we'll take over all of the oil in the region, right? So that's going to work out great. But when it doesn't, you're trapped. So now what do you have? You have, these evil twins. You have Ukraine saying, we got to get the Americans in, and so they can fight the Russians. You got Israel. We got to get the Americans in so they can fight the Iranians. The same thing will make you laugh, will make you cry, my friend. The thing that you set up so that you could take everything out. Now you got two sides screaming, you got to come in and join the war. Yes, we were proxies, but now it's time for you to come in and bail us out. You got the American people's kind of saying, oh, no, you don't. And meanwhile, Trump's got all of these political figures saying, "Yeah, we want you to do it. Who cares about the American people?" He's going to be the one that's going to get crushed.
Yeah, no, I think he is. But there are powerful forces, it's within this country. I think it was Netanyahu himself that said that, look, we have an eighth front. I think that's the term that he
Yeah,
used, right? It's the war within the U.S. It's the information war. It's a war for the minds and hearts of the American people. And we've seen, the most recent moves in that war, the acquisition of TikTok, pressure put on Elon Musk, the owner of Twitter X. And the guy who's taken over TikTok, he's part of a consortium, but Larry Ellison, yeah, he's just a lifelong Zionist fanatic. Elon Musk has been a big supporter of Zionism. But they said that we need to talk to our friend Elon. I think that's what Netanyahu said. And I've heard that recently they just made a change of policy. And I think it's those people that are critical of Israel have been denied some sort of status. I really don't know. I'm not on Twitter, so I don't know exactly, or X, so I don't know how it works. But they have actually been demoted in a certain way. I just saw that today. So that may be a change in policy that's happening because of pressure from Israel. So this fight is ongoing, and we've got the mega donors. Maybe we've got some blackmail. I don't know. You got all kinds of things. Trump might not want to do this, but there are powerful forces in this country that, yeah, will just make sure that he does do it, and that he doesn't slip out of it this time.
yeah, I think you're right. But there's the other part of it too, and that is, man, if he gets in that, okay, that's right, we're going to go strike Iran. Well, a couple of things. Number one, the last time the Israelis attacked Iran, they had a 12 to 14 hour, somewhere between 8 and 14-hour jump where Iran's air defense systems were down. They had a bunch of people in there that could make drones and do all kinds of things. I think the Iranians have mostly taken that apart. You ain't going to have a jump. You're not going to have that this time. You're going to have to go straight toe to toe with them. Right. And once they, you basically, if it's a bar fight, you walked up and you punched a guy when he wasn't looking and he fell. And then he got up and he turned around and he was like 6'4", 250 pounds, and he kicked your butt into the floor, right?
Yeah.
Now you're going to walk face up to him and just start swinging?
Yeah, no, it's different now, right? He wasn't looking. Now he's looking at you. He's glaring at you across the, he's going to watch your every move. And that's what's happening. I mean, the Iranians are ready, and they're importing weapons, and they're vigilant, and they know what might happen, and maybe another decapitation strike. And they've worked out, okay, well, if I get assassinated, who's going to fill my shoes? They've got everything set up, and they're ready to fight. So, right, it's not going to be easy. And then there's the problem of the air defense. That, according to the Wall Street Journal, is really why at the end, shortly after Trump's stunt with the nuclear facilities, the Israelis actually very quickly agreed, in fact, asked, for a ceasefire because they were running out of air defense. Now, their air defense was inadequate. Obviously, missiles were getting through and doing significant damage, but just, they were looking, maybe just they were days from having nothing left, and then all those missiles, I don't know what percentage they were taking down, but all of them would come through, and maybe then the drones too. That's the one thing that they were able to take out. So yeah, they're in a difficult state. They got to, the air defenses again really. That's the Achilles heel. I think it's Mark Sloboda says that about the American military establishment. Our whole that's maybe the weakest link in the chain, and those stockpiles are way down. That's why we've told the Ukrainians you're not getting any more Patriots. Well, okay, the Israelis just about used up what they had, and but they're going to have to wait. Again, we just don't have that MIC. We don't have the industrial capacity to replace them. So they're in a tough state. That's one reason why, Charlie and I have had this argument about it. He's expecting an attack real soon, and I'm not so sure about it, because just objectively looking at it, they lost the advantage they had the first time. And their stockpiles have been drawn down. They may want to do it. I think there's no question that they want to do it, and that at some point, they'll strike again. but I don't think they can do it now. Maybe they won't be. Who knows? Maybe they won't ever be able to do it again. That was their one chance. I hope so.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the situation, here's the other part of it. What makes Israel Israel? Because they got a bunch of people from Brooklyn and New Jersey, and of course Paris and Moscow, 20% of are Russian, but they got a bunch of people from other countries. Hey, come here to Israel. Why? Because you're Jewish and it's safe here. It's not safe where you are because there's anti-Semitism. Now you're here, it's a barrel of monkeys. You're gonna love it here. Well, one of the issues they had is so many people were leaving during the last conflict with Iran. They literally shut down all exit from the country. Do you remember that? They literally said nobody can leave. And the people were like, we're out of here. No, you had people getting on boats in the Mediterranean trying to make it to Cyprus, escaping the country at night. Why?
Right.
Because Israel is not Israel if everybody leaves.
Yeah.
I don't think that Iran is going to be, they're going to pull any punches. I would think this. I think one of the things Iran learned was, hey, they're short. In 12 days, the number of missiles we fired almost ran them out of air defense. Why don't we fire that many the first 2 days this time? Let's run them out of air defense with drones and missiles real quick. So by the third or fourth day, they're going to be out. If we, because they slowed up the second week, why slow up? Run them out early. Get them to punch themselves out early. Then they're in a world of trouble by day 4 or 5. And I think you're going to see something totally different. And of course, as we know, we don't know how much, but they have rearmed with some help from their friends. If they got the S-400s, man, if you're in Iraqi airspace, they can shoot you down. If they got S-400s, you can't hide on the other side of the border in Iraqi airspace. If they got S-400, there's no way around that. They claim they do, but who knows?
Yeah. No, I guess it was an Iranian official who said that they had, that they were being delivered, or it wasn't clear if they'd already arrived or not. I think in any case, it actually takes a while to set them up and train people. It's going to be months, before they can, maybe they can do, within a couple of months, they already present some kind of threat to, let's say, Israeli aircraft, but for them to reach their full potential,
and maybe Russians are running them.
Yeah, who knows?
There are a whole lot of Americans that were firing the weapons and running the stuff in, and a lot of American mercenaries that were like the Patriot systems. Those aren't Ukrainians; those are American contractors and mercenaries. All of the HIMARS, American contractors and mercenaries, right? Well, you know what? There may be some Russians who may be contractors and mercenaries who can run some of the S-400s and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, certainly possible. I mean, it's just no matter what, you look at the balance of forces. You have Iran, a country of 95 million people, and then you have Israel, and we're looking like
9 million.
Yeah, roughly. 9 million, right? And you look at the land area, the disproportion is much greater in that case. So, I mean, there's a concentration of targets for this country of 95 million people, and they can scatter their missiles and different bases up in the mountains in the north and in the west, and just no way that you can take them all out. And they've got this. It's just sort of this one small belt of land on the Mediterranean. You just look at it. It's just, if you get into a war of attrition that lasts more than 12 days, it's not going to go well for the Israelis. It's just not. I think they have to know that. I think maybe, that Netanyahu does know it, and again, it's just he's banking on the Americans to bail him out. But it would be bad for us. It would be just inexcusably stupid for us to be drawn into it. The one thing you can say, that Biden did all these terrible things, but he managed to keep out of a war with Iran. He played all kinds of games to pull out of it, made special deals with the Iranians. We know about that, because he understood how disastrous it could be. I think there were enough sane people in the Pentagon, that just told him. And I don't know if we have enough sane people left anymore. And I don't know, what exactly the Israelis have on, Trump, but, it just may be that we do get pulled into it. And, again, the Israelis will go in knowing they're going to lose, but just banking on, just sure that the Americans will come to the rescue, and probably they're right. And then we'll have a disaster on our hands.
Before we go, I do have a one last question.
Sure.
Um, and I hate to beat a dead horse. The Charlie Kirk situation.
Yeah.
The the story now basically requires a miracle. 30 odd six. Charlie got shot with a 30 odd six that didn't leave his. I mean, a 30 odd six that lodged somewhere in under his skin, and they called it a miracle because that's really in the physical world. That's what it would be. It would be, in fact, be a miracle. I'm not big on miracles myself, but I guess some people are. But when it gets to the point where the government story requires a miracle, I think it's pretty much you can say it has fallen apart.
Uh-huh.
And it seems to have had effect that young conservatives, they're looking at Israel saying, looking at you, Israel, we
Yeah.
think you did it. And they know they ain't thinking anymore. They're like, we know Israel killed him. Whether they did or not, we don't know.
Yeah. Right.
But there's ample evidence that you could find a motive, shall we say, for instance, if they're going to attack Iran again. And Charlie Kirk, the last time, was in the White House screaming, don't attack Iran. You might want him out of the way before you do it the next time. Just throwing that out there. But your thoughts on Charlie Kirk, his death, and the effect that it's had on everything?
It seems to be having a huge impact. Again, I probably get this through Charlie because he follows that stuff more closely than I do, but he's seeing it everywhere. There is a lot, and we're seeing it actually in response to some of our own videos. It's like when we talk about this and we talk about the Israeli involvement, there's a huge spike in viewership and new subscribers and so on and so forth. People are coming in and joining the dissident community because of this.
Yes.
And that's kind of, it's taken me by surprise, but it seems to be very real. I don't know who did it, but I can't blame anybody who strongly suspect Israel. First of all, Israel has a history, a very recent and bloody history of assassinating their enemies. And they're doing it left and right. They're just kind of a big assassination machine. And then they had the motive. That's one thing that Max Blumenthal has done. He's really dug up. He's done excellent work, but he's shown that there was real anger, within the Zionist donor community that had been supporting Charlie Kirk. They were really upset with him, and one of them pulled out like just 2 days before the assassination. He had like $6 million that he had donated, but he was going to pull it back because he was furious with Charlie Kirk. And then there were rumors that Charlie Kirk was going to bring back Candace Owens, who has become very, yeah. But anyway, so they had the motive. They have this history. Now, whether or not they did it, I don't know. I don't really see how they did, but who knows? I don't even understand really what a 30-06 and whatever, but I do understand that there are problems with the story. Now, there may be some explanation other than, Israeli involvement, but again, I just can't blame people for just looking at Israel, when this is, and that's maybe, it was a horrible tragedy. I didn't really know much about the guy, but I really was saddened to hear the news. But the silver lining to it is that it seems to have woken up a lot of people, especially on the right.
Yeah, I think you're right. It really has, and it has create. Some of the things that Tucker Carlson. I saw this Tucker Carlson video the other day. I'm like, whoa, boy, he better be looking over the corner for a trans activist that's a quick change artist and a gun specialist too, because boy.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes I feel like, because if his background, the wealth and power that he came from with his father, I feel like Tucker Carlson is a guy who maybe represents a faction of the ruling elite. And so he's somewhat protected, you know what I mean? That he can say things that other people wouldn't say because of the faction of the ruling elite that he represents gives him, the clearance to do that, if you know what I'm saying. Otherwise, I'm just saying.
Yeah, well, no, I've heard some of these same things. He's telling it how it is, and he's not pulling his punches now. Of course, he did lose his job at Fox News. That was one thing he went, clearly, it made no sense. Why do you fire this guy? He was the single most popular. He had the single most popular show there, but obviously he had crossed too many red lines, and so he had to go.
But he doesn't need the money anyway, so it
Yeah,
doesn't
but
matter
that's
to
right.
him.
That does
Said what he was
this
getting, he
money.
probably donated. That's pennies to him.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, and that's something that wealth can do for you. It can give you the independence, and unfortunately, most wealthy people don't use it for anything good. But in this case, he apparently is. So yeah, he's a real force. So he's not fringe or anything. He's got an audience of millions of people, and or generally most of them are self-described conservatives. And so he does present a real threat to the Israeli stranglehold on U.S. foreign policy. So we'll see what what happens.
Yeah,
I
Larry
hope he's
Ellison.
fine. I hope he's fine.
Yeah, but what they say, they're open up in an eighth front.
Yeah, right. Maybe they'll. Who knows? There will be some sort of scandal manufactured about him. I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, an AI video of him doing something.
Right.
So, all right. Well, thank you very much. Certainly appreciate it. And everyone, Conversations with an S among the ruins. Peter and Charlie are on. Generally, they do 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at like 11 or something. I think it's 11.
Yeah. Well.
Ish.
Yeah. 11-ish. That's when it's usually released. Right.
And then they'll break up the videos and they'll have segments of them for you to watch. So please go over there, subscribe to that channel, and enjoy it. It's great stuff, and you really will learn a lot and enjoy it. Thanks a lot, everyone. And don't forget, as always, you see everything scrolling across the bottom. If you are available to, if you're able to, PayPal or buy me a coffee or whatever. Thank you very much to all my Patreon people. So, go over to Substack and make sure you subscribe to my Substack channel. I've been writing some articles there recently. And the most important thing you can do is share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.